In terms of raising children, children are, of course, highly encouraged in Islam, as they are in most societies, and certainly most traditional societies. Both parents have a responsibility to provide in some way for their children. As I said, fathers are financially responsible for their children. Mothers are also responsible for their children. The Quran recommends, for example, that women breastfeed their children for 2 years unless she and her husband mutually agree to shorten that time. So both husband and wife have a responsibility toward their children. As I mentioned before, you have a duty to raise them religiously. This is a religious duty you have before God. I think someone mentioned that on the Day of Judgment, your children will intercede for you according to certain traditions. All the more reason to raise them religiously. It's very important. It's one of your obligations as a Muslim. At the same time, family planning and contraception is permissible within Islam. In Islam, there is a very positive view of sexuality within marriage, even irrespective of procreation. So it's, for example, in the Catholic tradition, one of the barriers to contraception is the traditional Catholic view that, that sexuality is really just for procreation, so that if, in fact, no children are going to result from it, then it's not really entirely legitimate, religiously speaking. That's not the case in Islam. Sexuality also serves as a way of bringing husband and wife closer. It's also something that is enjoyable. It's something that both husband and wife have a right to from one another. And so contraception is permitted, but it is permitted only if you have the mutual consent of husband and wife. Because of the importance of children, a husband cannot deny wife to his children and vice versa. If both husband and wife agree to practice contraception, then they may. So that certainly is a possibility. When you talk about the question of abortion, there are multiple opinions in Islam about abortion. Most of the schools of law allow a very small and limited right to abortion under certain circumstances. They differ, for example, in terms of how far along the pregnancy is before you can terminate it, but all of them require that there be a really compelling medical reason for this. If the life of the mother is at stake, then an abortion within a certain period of time is permissible. And the understanding is that although children are valued and this kind of thing, at the same time, a fetus is not yet born, but a mother already is a full-grown, established individual who has a set of duties herself she has to fulfill. Other people depend upon her. Her husband depends upon her. If she has other children, her children depend upon her. And so if it's a case where having this child or bearing this child is going to seriously incapacitate or kill possibly the mother, then abortion is permitted. Again, it differs among the schools of law. It is not a widespread thing in Islam, but it is possible under those particular conditions. Yes?
You said that it's for certain medical conditions, especially where it's cases where the mother's life is in jeopardy of having a child and she could die. What about in cases of rape?
Well, rape is, of course, a terrible thing in Islam, but that is not, that I have ever seen anywhere, a justification for abortion. Any other questions? Yes?
When a woman enters into the marriage contract with the future husband, can she make that part of the contract that she'll be allowed to practice contraception? Can that be one of the stipulations at various times in marriage?
Well, I suppose that it could be. One of the things to think about is that, again, it's sort of a tempocentric perspective in some ways, because there's some evidence that, in fact, women may have been much more interested in having children and not practicing contraception than men were. If a woman had many children, this was a source of security for her, and at the same time, this was just additional responsibility for the husband in a way that it wasn't really for her. So, I suppose in principle that's a possibility, but it's not something that really would come up, I think, in most cases.
In modern day, if the wife
Sure. I mean, if she wanted to pursue a career, she could, perhaps she could say that pursuant to this, I want to postpone children to a certain point. I've never heard of that happening in a marriage, and I can't, in a marriage contract. I can't at the moment think of, whether or not there would be a legal barrier to that. I mean, Islamic law is quite, complex. I mean, it might be that there is. But, at the moment, I can't think of anything that would be a barrier to that in particular.